Welcome to Dr. Roger and Friends, the bright side of longevity, hosted by 3 Ps in a podcast, Doc Roger, Teresa, and Danielle. Thanks for joining us for Coffee and Conversation.
Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for being with us. And, this is a topic that we have not put off because it's not important. I think we've waited to address it because it is hugely important and probably the basis of our humanity, the basis of being healthy, the basis of living a good life. And that's about being connected to others, social connection. It's huge, and it touches everything. Teresa, you were telling me a story that you read about a town in Pennsylvania, and I think it absolutely is just a beautiful entree to whatever we talk about today. Would you tell us that?
You bet. Roseto. You're right. Eastern Pennsylvania. It was settled by immigrants from Italy in the 1880s. And for decades, the people of Roseto managed to preserve their old world traditions and lifestyles from Italy, from the old country. And interestingly, in the 1950s, it was reported that deaths due to heart disease were dramatically lower than the neighboring towns. And those neighboring towns were, of course, more typically American in terms of lifestyle. Now, don't get me wrong. The people of Roseto were smoking cigars and working in foundries and frying their meatballs and, enjoying their cheese and salami. So it wasn't what they ate and what they did wasn't terribly different from the other towns, but it was different in some key ways. And you've already alluded to it, Roger, but multi-generations living together, strong social ties, and nobody was alone or lonely because no one was ever without that overwhelming support and friendship of the village.
Wow. Yeah. I just came back from Italy. You guys were missing me, I'm sure. And,
Indeed.
And I saw this. I saw it even in parts of big cities, that culture, and it's not strictly Italian. I think it's kind of Mediterranean, but it's other places too. Sitting down and eating it was a food thing. But more than a food thing, it was a connection thing. It was, paying attention to the stories and laughing together and just being together. It was and intergenerational. I never felt that anyone had anything but interest in when I was speaking with them, even though my Italian was not all that good or their English wasn't all that good, but we did connect. So I'm not surprised to hear that, but that's hard to keep in today's world.
I was going to say, it sounded like you had a 2-hour dinner with connection versus 20 minutes with everybody looking at the TV or their telephone.
It's tough. I bet they're even having trouble in Roseto.
That's right. The traditions did indeed start to wear off, even as early as 1965. So it's been a while that those traditions have sort of been eroded, but they call it the Roseto effect. So it gives us something to aspire to.
So the heart disease is getting more common now.
Yes.
Because things have changed, and I think the younger generation is more likely to move away rather than stay there and live away. So that, but this is no surprise. Here I go again, hunter-gatherer, Roger. This is how we lived for eons. For most of the time we've walked the earth. Intergenerational, tight-knit, helping each other, sitting down, eating together, interacting, not particularly in a rush. And so if that's going away, we slit our wrists, what do we do? We can do something about this, can't we?
Well, the research is so hopeful, I think, and inspiring. We can add 9 years to our life with just good social connections. That to me is just so powerful.
That's remarkable. Remarkable. And it's a good quality of 9 years because obviously, by definition, you're with others in a substantive way. They've done long-term studies in Michigan and in California. And if someone was not connected in a substantive way, that's having like 2 to 5 contacts, pretty good contacts. They spend quality time with. Some you could call at 2 a.m. if you needed them. And if you did not have that, you were anywhere from 2 to 5 times more likely to be affected with, depression. You'd expect that. But what about, they saw dementia, heart disease, cancer? All the big players were related to that. And, they didn't understand why you were getting that. That didn't seem. There was research on post-heart attack victims. If they went back to a house where there was no one else living there, they were significantly likely to have a second one. Women who were recovering from breast cancer, if they had friends, they were much more likely to never have a second episode, and more likely if they didn't. It just goes on and on and on how much connection helps and how much lack of connection is harmful.
Yeah, there's a ton of research out there now. They had a recent study with 20,000 people where they surveyed them, and more than half reported being lonely. 1 in 4 felt like no one understood them, and 2 out of 5 said they felt isolated or their relationships lacked meaning. So to your point, Roger, it didn't matter whether a person had 2 friends or 50 friends. It's only mattered that they felt like they had enough connection. So for some people, it might be 5 or 6. For some people, it might be just 1 true friend. But some of the other stuff is kind of staggering. Like you increase your risk of mortality by 26% if you feel isolated. And we've mentioned this before. It's like you're smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The risk factor is as high as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
But people are messy, right? And they hurt us and they disappoint us. But it's like you can't live with them, you can't live without them, right?
No, in fact, I mean, the flip side there was a recent study in Germany. They talked to 1,200 people and they gave them some things to do to be happier. It was a happiness thing. It had nothing to do with loneliness. But the people who picked a personal goal that involved connecting with somebody, whether it's teaching somebody how to cook a meal, whether it was doing like a random act of kindness, it didn't have to be big things, were significantly happier than people who focused on goals that were for themselves.
No, I'm not surprised. Let's think back. Okay, let's think back. Something that happened in our lives that was really memorable, pleasant, something we think of often, and, you get those warm feelings. How many of those things happen totally alone? It usually involves people. And you've heard me before. I think we mentioned it in another podcast. But, as a physician, I privileged, I think. I didn't always think it was a privilege, but I was privileged to be with someone in their final moments on Earth before they passed. And, it's never about accomplishments or it's all about connection. And I've heard people who, oncologists who's even see more death. And to the extent that someone has had a good connections, and you can say it simply that they were loved or loved, it makes the passing dramatically different from some depressing, horrible event to something that is sort of a natural thing, but much more satisfying as you look back on your life. We're creatures. We're herd animals. We are, we like to think, the old westerns, the Clint Eastwood westerns, the loner, and goes, that was billed as something that was great. Well, not great. Even a cowboy will tell you they ride fence long enough, they start, their horse is everything. They start to talk about the world's problem with their horse or their dog or something. No, we do need others. No question. So what are the barriers? Okay. I mean, if this is something that's good for us, it makes us feel good. How did we ever get to this point where we're lonely? and where we don't seem to have the connections that we want. How did we get there?
Technology, I think, is a big player. It's not the only player, but it's causing us to connect with people behind a computer, or we're staring down at our cell phone so that we don't have to interact with people around us. And some of that is contributing to social anxiety. There's 15 million people in the world who are diagnosed with social anxiety. And as we age, 1 in 5 older adults have it, and it gets significantly worse. So people are self-isolating.
Yeah, we're self-isolating with technology. This isn't, I think we're born with an inclination to connect to others, but not necessarily with the skills. Would you believe that I was shy as a kid?
Nope.
Well, I was. And so, multiple actions and reactions and relationships and interactions that didn't go were anywhere near as catastrophic as I predicted they would be. And, you get positive feedback and you get better at it. And then you begin to relish it. My wife is always embarrassed. I'm always asking servers their names and, and I'd like to get their whole life, but they're busy, so they can't. But it's a learned skill, but it's probably something maybe we have to do in small steps. What do you think, Teresa?
We do. We don't learn it. And if you notice, there's so many people who engage in conversation, and they'll ask a question, but you can already see that they're already thinking about their response. They're not really listening. And so I think what goes a long way is showing real interest in another person, like you do, Roger, in a restaurant, or like I've seen you do in an Uber situation where you do have the time to get to know somebody, showing genuine interest in another person and really listening to their responses, asking good questions and really listening and being present. I think those are the most successful, if you could use that word, social beings.
Positive too. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a story. I have a fiction writer, a friend of mine, and we have a new fiction writer amongst us.
We do.
Danielle,
indeed.
What's the title of your book?
Well, the first one's Data Collectors. The second one is the sequel to the Data Collectors, Breach of Contract, which is it's in production as we speak.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I know what that involves, and that's huge. But I mean, these stories just didn't come out of the dark reaches of Danielle's mind.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
Well, some did, but a lot of them were based in fact, or at least related in some way to an interaction you had. Maybe you didn't meet someone who had horns and, one eye, but if any of your characters do, but yeah, I think they're based on it. I'm just sometimes at a loss for words as far as how powerful this is. Stories. This was the currency of our whole world as humans, telling stories. And you guys may roll your eyes when I tell stories, but the fact is, this is what keeps our interest. It was the currency of interaction. And I have found with presentations that stories they'll get you over any hump that you may have. You could have the most boring topic in the world, and you tell a story related to it, and you're going to get some reaction and some interest.
Yeah, and I think you hit on it earlier when you said people lack social skills. And I do believe that's changing, because growing up, I feel like the education system was much more about staying ahead and being the best. And, so you weren't allowed to let people see your flaws, where I'm hearing with friends of mine who have kids now, they're teaching kindness, compassion, tolerance. And these were kind of things that were not part of my experience. And I believe we're seeing the result of that now. And I know Teresa's talked a lot about, monitor your thoughts, because what ends up happening is you have all this self-deprecating stuff going on. Oh, I'm going to annoy that person, or I'm bothering them. And a lot of times, as you've found out, Roger, when you engage people, they're not bothered. They're actually happy you started talking to them.
Absolutely. No, I have absolutely no doubt. And when I give a talk, people say, okay, well, what should I do to help connect more with people. I don't really have all the skills, but I want to connect. And so I usually tell them three things from my experience and from my reading. And I said, the first one you've already alluded to have compassion. We're all in this together. We're all doing the best we can. We're just getting through the night, so to speak. And yeah, we do some stupid things and we hurt people, but all in all, we're just doing the best we can. And it may be misguided and it may be different than you would do it, but tolerance and compassion. Forgiveness, I think, is a big one, because people are messy and they will hurt you. And so to forgive is incredibly important, And the last one, this is a big one, it usually gets a laugh. Give up the need to be right. Particularly during this era in my life, I've never seen it as much as now, where this is a huge barrier to significant social connection, a positive social connection. There's social interaction, but it can get violent. But it's about me and I'm right and you're wrong. And if you give up that need to be right, believe me, I've been married 50 years. Things go a whole lot smoother. Even though I still don't do it all the time, Paula will tell you.
And when you're giving up the need to be right, you're giving up judgment, because
Yes.
People who get anxious about talking to somebody is like, oh, they're going to hate me. And when you realize they're not judging you and you stop judging other people, it just kind of opens this doorway. And that's where just being mindful of the other person and kind of tuning outward versus worrying about what's going on and how you're being perceived.
You are correct. Teresa, you're the coach. So how do we kaizen ourselves into better social connection?
Oh, I think lots of steps. First and foremost, small steps, right? Kaizen, easy, simple, eye contact, a simple hello, whatever feels doable. Maybe there's some technology that would help us. We've discussed that it could turn us away from social connection, but there's certainly technology, apps and such to bring us together, meetup groups being just one of many examples.
Yeah, let's get a text or something out there. Let's all meet at the coffee shop, And so look what it did in Libya. Brought tens of thousands of people to a place all at the same time. So certainly it can bring us with a friend or two to make it happen. And what I particularly value, because I have actually done this, is that there were important people in my life who fell out for one reason or another. We went different ways, or it wasn't an argument or anything. We just sort of drifted apart. And with technology, you can find those people. And some of them I really wanted to thank, because they were very important to me at important times, and I just never got around to it. And it was a very touching experience. Wasn't a dry eye in the house.
That's it. And if you haven't been on meetup.com, it's where people go to search out interests and hobbies, and everyone's welcome. So that's such a great example of something that didn't exist before, and now anybody can go to a meetup group and feel welcome and go hiking or just sit and have coffee. There's so many different groups, so it's definitely something to check out.
You can treat it like a first date. Instead of, you don't have to go and have a whole meal. You can go and have a cup of coffee and tell yourself, hey, I'm just going to stay an hour and leave. And when you know there's an exit plan, you're not going to be stuck there being social forever. And bring a friend. And, and I think it's really important, if you know people who are self-isolating, to invite them and say, hey, we're only going to stay a half an hour, and then we'll go do something else.
Well, it doesn't have to be a huge thing, talking in front of 500 people, or you're meeting a whole bunch of new, this can be just a little bit of a step at a time, and, but I guess to sum it up, we're better together, aren't we?
We are. We can reconstruct maybe a little bit of Roseto in our own lives and reap the benefits.
We hope this podcast is a source of inspiration. If you're ready to dive deeper into these concepts and really apply them in your life, join us over at Master Life. You'll have a personalized experience and lots of support to create your own long, bright future. mymasterlife.com. You've been listening to Dr. Roger and Friends, The Bright Side of Longevity. If you like the show, please rate and review, and be sure to click to follow.